Welcome back to Unauthorized Opinions. JFK files are apparent. They're upfront and personal. A little bit to get to before that. We are going through, I spend hours going through JFK files. There's over 2,000 PDFs. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell. I was going to say the Liberty Bell. Hit the Liberty Bell in the bottom corner so you don't miss a video. Thanks for everybody watching on YouTube, Rumble, and X. Thanks for the listeners on audio platforms like Spotify and Apple. We love you all. Leave us a review. Leave us a like and a subscribe. It helps us a lot as we continue to grow the podcast. But we are skimming through, and by skimming through, reading attentively the JFK files. It was a hell of a process just to download them all. Like I said, over 2,000 PDF files. And unless you want to go in and download them individually, you have to get some sort of, browser plugin. It wasn't that big of a deal. It was annoying. So I started going over these a few hours ago, and I just had to keep going and going and going. These JFK files are tedious. A lot of them is documents full of nothing. A lot of the files in these batches are backgrounders on people. A lot of them are letters for requests, expense requests, tiny little tidbits of stories. There was a page of probably 50, or a block of about 50 pages, which just consisted of interviews about people who were involved in this one guy's life who wanted a security clearance. So some guy wanted to work for the CIA. He was requesting security clearance, obviously, for this person. Whoever was in charge was requesting this. And in order to do that, they went and interviewed basically everyone in his apartment building, anyone that's ever seen or heard of him. They asked if they had ever heard him or any of his family members say anything positive about communism or about Cuba, and that's where a lot of these files come from. A long-going Cold War with Russia and with Cuba. Weird CIA operations with Cuba, with the Soviet Union, personnel files on people. There was even a large document about how to properly file documents on a person. I believe it was called a 302 file or 203 file. It was this large document on how to classify documents for a person, how to categorize personnel documents. So a lot of filler stuff in there that's not a lot of interesting stuff. I went through, I think, a couple hundred. It's going to take a while to get through more, but I pulled aside the ones that we're going to get to. And those include stuff about a little bit about Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination, a little bit about Lee Harvey Oswald, a little bit about some just random CIA operations, some random secret agent stuff that was extremely interesting just to see and hear how the CIA works. I don't know what I'm going through empty tabs here. Some interesting secret operations from the CIA that you would have never heard about if this stuff didn't come out. And it's gun running, it's clandestine operations in Cuba, it's all that fun stuff. But before we get to that, I want to touch on some ridiculous stuff I saw over the weekend. This is from Colin Wright, this journalist, Colin Wright. And he says, a growing trend in academic publishing is positionality statements, where authors list all their intersectional forms of privilege oppression. This one is particularly absurd, where authors talk about being cisgenders. So we've heard of land acknowledgements. Those are big in Canada. We've heard of preferred pronouns on email signatures and stuff like that. But now we have positionality statements where people can tell you how they're oppressing you before you read their writing. Mindful that our identities can influence our approach to science, Roberts et al. 2020, we wish to provide the reader with information about our background. So these are a bunch of science writers who are prefacing their works, their research with their race and gender. The authors have intersecting identities relating to the work reported in this article. All authors are cisgender menstruating individuals. Let me repeat that. Cisgender menstruating individuals who identify as intersectional feminists. Some are part of the LGBTQIA plus community, and others are allies. So nobody's a bigot in this group. Let that be first and foremost what you recognize. None of them are bigots. All others are passionate about addressing inequalities. All authors are passionate about addressing inequalities and injustice, hence our involvement in efforts to reduce stigma and transphobia. Overall, much of our work is driven by a desire to promote social justice and well-being. So we're just a bunch of lesbian white women, and those of us who aren't support transgenderism. Isn't that lovely? Isn't that lovely? I think we should institute this for, comic books. Maybe this is helpful. Maybe this is helpful for people who believe the other way. If you're about to watch a Netflix show and you see this at the front, you know not to watch it. If you're about to watch, I mentioned Netflix, the remake of the 90s, I mentioned comic books, the remake of the 90s X-Men cartoon. If they told you right out from the onset, this was written by a bunch of people that think X-Men is about diversity and equity and inclusion, we've changed one of the characters to be non-binary, you're probably not going to watch that. If you watch, if you want to go watch Michelle Obama's podcast and the start of it said, this is this was created by Michelle Obama, you're probably not going to watch that, right? Or any Netflix show where they tell you, we all have degrees in the infamous lesbian dance theory. We all went to Yale on, what's the word where they put people in just for race, for their race, imaginary producer, affirmative action. We are all affirmative action Yale graduates with master's degrees in crumping, the forgotten dance style of the mid-2000s. Please watch our survival disaster movie where a black man takes his new white family on a journey through the woods to defend against aliens, and then it turns out the aliens are there for racist reasons, but also they want to save the environment, so people don't know what to do. The aliens are not only ethnically cleansing people, but they're trying to stop climate change. You might watch that one. I'm not sure how you would feel about that one, but I think we need these. A lot of people have been giving backlash. This is another thing I want to touch on. A lot of people have been giving backlash to the new Wizard of Oz movie, the new Snow White movie. The new Snow White movie does not have any dwarves in it. It does not have any little people in it because Peter Dinklage from Game of Thrones thought it wasn't good to have actual dwarfs in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Why have a Snow White? Why have snow? Peter Dinklage thought this was a bad idea, probably because he didn't want to share the spotlight with 6 other people, so he didn't want to be in that movie. If it was Snow White and the dwarf, Peter Dinklage would have been all over it, but he doesn't like addressing, and I like Peter Dinklage, I like his acting, but he doesn't want to address the fact that there actually are dwarfs and they're not the same height as other people. But people are criticizing that because it's boring, because it's annoying and stupid and woke. And then you've got this other Wizard of Oz, I think it's called Wicked something. And we've got Ariana Grande looking very sick. Nobody's asking her how she's doing. She's holding hands with a bald lady. She's, looking like she's on a hunger strike, perhaps for more terrible movies to be made. And I want to know, is anybody asking if Ariana Grande is okay? Is anybody saying, have you eaten a sandwich this week? And this might come across as cruel. And she's also now white. She's no longer Hispanic. I'd like to point out that this is happening. This is truly what's happening here. This is a very chic look. The skeleton look. The 78 pounds I haven't taken my iron pills look. It's a very interesting look that we're going with these days. But Disney, I feel like a lot of women want to believe that Disney is turning the woke corner from put a chick in it, make it lame and gay. They want to believe that they're turning the corner with everything else that's going on. You know, the commercials are getting less woke. The government agencies are being forced to be less woke. People are getting on board with deportations of illegal immigrants. The borders being closed. The government waste spending is being cut. All these things are happening that are a force for good, or at least a return to normalcy in the most general sense, where people can have a little bit more control of their lives and not be as affected by the government or outside sources. Women are hoping that Disney is doing this too. Disney is coming back, and, you know, this Ariana Grande movie is just a sing-songy, loving embrace of what Disney used to be, and Snow White is just, you know, going back to the old days, the 1950s, when we had CGI dwarves in all of our movies, and nobody's really asking, why are we doing this? Why are we pretending when it comes to these things? And it's an ongoing problem. I call it the Taylor Swift problem. When the women of the movement, let's call it, the right-wing movement, and I'm not talking about the conspiracy grandmas on Facebook. I'm not talking about a guy who has connections with the military told me so arm of the right-wing movement. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the 20 and 30-year-old conservative women who really think that, you know, as long as I say a few certain things, it's okay that I say Taylor Swift's amazing. It's okay that I say Ariana Grande is putting on great performances. It's okay that I'm saying that the Sparside Women of Snow White are becoming, you know, it's a great movie. Everybody should see it. But people are not asking the right questions. Why is there a bald lady in... These are the correct questions people need to be asking. Why is there a bald lady in Wizard of Oz? Why is Ariana Grande basically 71 pounds? Why is such a sparside Hispanic lady playing Snow White when she said Snow White's actually terrible and the story's actually terrible? Why are there no actual dwarves in a movie with dwarves in the title? Why are we CGIing out? If we are in favor of social justice, and I know we are, why are we CGIing out or AIing dwarves when we could hire every single prominent dwarf actor that has ever existed to be in this movie? Why are none of the conservative women asking this question? And I think the answer to that is because they're stupid. That's not the PG way to put it. That's not a politically correct way to put it. But I think the reality here is because we want to find that art and we want to find that return to normalcy, that return to actual care being put into movies. And because Taylor Swift doesn't say trans women are women outright, and because Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs didn't call it Snow White and her three husbands who fathered three cisgender intersectional people who might be half the size as regular people movie, just because we haven't come out right and said that it's okay to champion these things and pretend that they're really good and pretend that they are shrugging off woke sentiments and pushing them by the wayside. That is not what's happening. These movies are terrible and woke, and I'm expecting the podcasting women of the right wing to come out and say something about it. Or the other option here is, let's put that energy into MSNBC. There's a lot of job openings for MSNBC and CNN right now. If you want, in honor of the JFK files being released, if you want to go and put in some subversion work, some clandestine operational work at MSNBC and CNN, and go and share the views of Ariana Grande movies. Maybe add in a little Jennifer Lawrence movies where she says she's the first female action star of all time. Those sentiments will be accepted at those outlets. And then eventually when they tell you you're a fascist for liking anything else, for wanting to have children, or not wanting to watch things based on people's races, or not wanting to go into black-owned businesses, particularly because you support entrepreneurship based on race, then you'll be kicked out, and maybe you'll think, maybe that Ariana Grande movie wasn't so good, maybe her holding hands with the bald lady is a little weird, maybe Taylor Swift completely endorsing Democratic candidates every time she gets and dating the Pfizer guy, maybe those things aren't just the overlooking things, the things to overlook, and you'll start to get your shows back. You'll start to get your movies back. You'll start to get your singers back, where instead of pushing vaccines and, bald, sickly-looking women, you'll actually get fantasies about the prince and the lovely songs, and we'll get some actual dwarves in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Now let's look at some JFK files. So a lot of these, like I said, a lot of these involved USSR and Cuba, and the first one that I found was actually, like, I'm skimming through these JFK files, hoping to find stuff, and I realized that a lot of the stuff came at the beginning. So this is a file of a guy that came up often, Valery Vladimirovich Kostakov. So this is a Russian guy who worked, I believe, at the USSR consulate in Mexico, who actually had contact with Lee Harvey Oswalt. So Lee Harvey Oswald, it turned out, he was going around the world looking for a... Now, if you know this, because you're really familiar with the JFK shooting, don't mind me. But this is a lot of stuff that a lot of people won't know unless they've looked into this in depth. And it's very interesting to find out that Lee Harvey Oswald went to Finland. He goes to Mexico. The CIA is tracking him because he's trying to get a visa to go to the USSR. Is that after he unalives JFK? I think that's what is happening here, is he's looking for a way out after he participates in this. And he wants to be accepted by the USSR. I'm not sure. It's also possible... it's hard to track all these timelines because everything's like, there's thousands of files, like I said, but it's also possible he went there to talk to them about doing this and then wanted to have a place to go back to. So this file says, "Dear David," whomever that is, "please refer to our conversation on May 6th about Kostakov, born in 1933 in Moscow. He was posted to Beirut in 78 as first secretary and may still be there. He's identified KGB and served in Mexico City from 61 to 71. We also note that Epstein in legend claims that according to CIA telecheck, Kostakov was Lee Harvey Oswald's KGB case officer in Mexico City. According to Barron, I'm just skipping the names of people who we don't know who they are, okay? So not to confuse anybody. Oswald was in Mexico between September and November 1963 and was seeking to obtain a Soviet visa. There was certainly a KGB interest in Oswald, although according to Nosenko, this was defensive. The reason for our current interest in Kostakov will be obvious. As you are aware, our embassy in Beirut, in common with other Western missions, has been subject to threats and violence in recent months in view of earlier hostile intentions from the KGB. We'd be grateful for your view on whether the KGB are likely to get behind any recent incidents. What are your comments on the Oswald story? Can you confirm that Kostakov was still in Beirut? So this Kostakov guy, according to these documents, was working at the USSR embassy in Mexico, and Lee Harvey Oswald went to the USSR consulate in Mexico and got in contact with this guy. This was the guy who was covering Oswald's case, where he was applying for a visa in USSR. So he's basically asking the USSR to let him defect to their country. Was this before or after? I don't recall. So there's a whole bunch of weird stories in these documents, and I want to bring up what I thought was a very interesting one, was about how the CIA operated in in Cuba. This is basically like every spy movie from back in the day you would hear of. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as exactly how you would imagine things would be in the 50s and 60s. And as I'm reading this, you'll be able to picture the guys in the fedoras or whatever caps with pens and glasses moving in and out of offices, planting low tech to try to trap people. That's exactly what the story is. And the preface of it is that there was a Chinese newspaper called the New China News Agency who opened an office in Havana, Cuba in 1959. Obviously, communist connections there. And the CIA wanted to know what was going on. So what the CIA did is they basically took two women who worked at the U.S. consulate in Cuba and said, we're going to use your apartments to spy on this Chinese news agency. It's really interesting. Let's read some of it to you here. So in 1959, the New China News Agency opened an office in Havana in the El Medico building, which is occupied partly by business concerns and partly used for residential apartments. Shortly thereafter, the Havana station obtained their concurrence of Ambassador Bonsall and Miss Caroline Stacy, an embassy employee, to mount audio operation against the Chinese company through the wall of the adjacent apartment in which Miss Stacy lives. So this woman who just works at the U.S. Embassy is now being... what's the word I'm looking for? This woman who works at the U.S. Embassy in Cuba is now being commissioned in CIA operations in order to spy on a Chinese news agency in Havana, Cuba. So they send a case officer, which is right here, and one technician to Havana and install a microphone and a tape recorder in November of 1959. By June of 1960, it became evident that two other rooms occupied by the Chinese news agency possibly housed communications equipment and were used for conferences. At that time, Brian Mills, a division case officer for this is the CIA again, went to Havana and explored the possibility of improving the listing operation they have going on there. He managed to lease an apartment directly over the Chinese office and arrange for a stay-behind agent to occupy this space. So they now have two apartments, at least, where they're monitoring a Chinese news company in Cuba. In August 1960, so 2 months later, a team of 3 technicians were sent to Havana on a separate division operation and agreed to install the additional equipment required for the Chinese operation. A second division case officer, Robert Neat, came down to Havana, and he, together with technicians, installed a probe microphone and tape recorder in the apartment obtained by Mills over the Chinese office. About this time, the equipment was removed from Miss Stacy's apartment with the exception of a plastic probe which was left in the wall and plastered over. And it didn't stop there. Things start to get worse. As an additional security precaution to provide a safe haven, and after consulting with the acting chief of the station, a key to an apartment building in the same building issued by Miss Marjorie Lennox, an embassy secretary, was obtained. So then they go and get another woman who's working at the embassy's apartment as a third station after they've kind of shut down the first one. Miss Lennox was told that access to her apartment was needed for photographic surveillance purposes. The station was then faced with the probability that time and security would work against holding indefinitely the lease to the apartment over the Chinese news agency, since the owners of the buildings were canceling subleasers or sublessors' contract and recalling leases. So the CIA decided to install transmitters and switches in order to permit continued monitoring of the target from a distant listening post. Another 3-man team of technicians consisting of these guys, who all had aliases, pretending to be tourists, had been sent to Havana to install audio equipment in the Chinese National Embassy before it was due to be turned over to the Chinese communists. And it's also interesting you see communists here. It's interesting back in the day to see how many people are making spelling mistakes. It's just a lot of these people are, regular people being conscripted to go work for the CIA. And we're going to And even those who aren't are making spelling mistakes on typewriters. It's just funny to see. And we're going to see later how they get spies to operate and how they brief them going over to China. This is just so many documents hugely related to spying operations with Cuba. This operation was aborted. The team was then sent to work on the installation of the transmitters in the apartment over the Chinese office. At 2400 hours on September 14th, one of the guys with the other technicians failed to keep a scheduled appointment with NEAT. At 0100 hours on the 15th of September, the apartment of Mrs. Lennox was entered into and searched by Cuban authorities, and she was taken into custody. NEAT, the stay-behind agent, so this is the guy they left to stay in one of the apartments to keep listening, and his wife were picked up by Cuban authorities and detained. As of today, the agent remains in custody of the Cuban authorities. His wife has been released and is still in Havana. NEAT was released on September 16 and subsequently returned to Washington, where he is being debriefed. Mrs. Lennox was subsequently released and has also returned to Washington. So once these people get released, they all get sent back to Washington. Just convenient. I guess we weren't spying, but we got to return to the United States right away. According to the articles in the Cuban papers, the 3 technicians were arrested while in the apartment over the Chinese newspaper office while they were completing the installation of the equipment. The press article adds that the key to Mrs. Lennox's apartment was found on one of the technicians who identified the apartment to which it belonged. All Cuban press releases to refer to the men by an alias and have not identified them as government or agency employees. It's unclear at present what story they'd been agreed to upon by the technicians and station personnel in the event that they were caught. While being interrogated with NEAT, the other guy indicated that NEAT was his boss, and NEAT consistently denied having any knowledge as to why he was being held. So the Cuban authorities catch all these CIA operatives working and spying on this Chinese news agency in these apartments, which includes 2 women who work at the consulate, one guy who is an agent there to spy on them, his wife, and these 3 technicians who were installing listening devices, tape recorders, and this hilarious 1959 technology. And when they get caught, the Cuban government doesn't even realize that they're CIA agents, and they're just referring to them by their alias names and trying to figure out who they're spying on. And this document, or who they're spying for, and this document goes on to say that they're updating these people's wives and their families back home. They're talking to one guy's dad. They're keeping them up to date, surely very accurately, on what's happening to them while they're being detained in Cuba. Now, it's funny. I guess it's not funny, but it's interesting. They thought they were being charged with espionage against the people of China, but the technicians who traveled to Cuba went there as tourists under very light commercial cover, it says. 2 of them were working for a company in New York and one in Baltimore. They were given cover stories of a telephone answering service and a name on the door. Telephone messages and mail are picked up periodically by an agency contract employee. The men were provided with this cover as well as an unbackstopped home address for use when entering or leaving Cuba, since they have to fill out the landing card with this information. Subsequent to their detention, the home addresses have been partially backstopped so that inquiries will indicate that someone with this alias name had lived in the apartment house in question. So there's so many people working for the CIA in this operation. It's crazy, right? You've got all these guys who are caught in Cuba, so now you have to send somebody to the fake addresses or the existing addresses that they were using as their cover so that they can say that, yes, somebody lived there. You've got somebody coming to pick up their mail so it doesn't look suspicious who works for the CIA. You've got all these people who are claiming to be tourists and just normal people walking around in Cuba and now in the United States who work for the CIA, and that's just wild to me. It's just like every single spy movie or book you've ever heard of. And that's exactly how it operates. That's exactly how things go. You've got a bunch of people who are pretending to be tourists that are actually just CIA agents. Isn't that lovely? Let's go to the next one, shall we? Let me make sure I know which one this is. Oh, this is a fun one. This is just a taste of how the CIA operates in Texas, and this is dated June 1960, and they're talking about the Mexican president, I believe, President Lopez Mateos of Mexico. And it's a conversation between him and Mr. Winston Scott, the chief of station in Mexico. So the head of some sort of CIA operation in Mexico, talking with the Mexican president. And this is a summary of the conversation they've had. I'm messing up my own screens here. Hold on. Get that zoomed in for you guys. Thank you, audio listeners, for your patience on this. We are continuing to read these CIA documents from the the JFK document dump, of which there are thousands. This memo contains a suggestion in paragraph 3 for consideration. It's very interesting. The president of Mexico said he is a friend of the United States, quote, not only because of necessity, but of genuine desire and ideology, end quote. He also said the invitation to the authorities in Cuba that was extended 2 weeks earlier was not of his own, and it was through the Mexican ambassador in Cuba. He then said he would not invite Fidel Castro to Mexico, even though the Cuban ambassador told President Lopez that they will request an invitation for Castro. So he's saying that he's loyal to the United States. He agrees with them ideologically, and that even though their ambassador to Cuba already invited Castro, he's not going to invite Castro to Mexico. President Lopez also asked that President Eisenhower be informed that he is delighted that a decision has now been made to get rid of Castro. And this is the funny part at the bottom. President Lopez was indirectly informed of CIA intentions in regard to Castro through a conversation between Mr. Scott and some other guy who informed Mr. Scott that President Lopez would not invite Castro to visit Mexico, even though the other guy had asked him to already. Mr. Scott, which is the CIA operations manager, we'll call him, of Mexico, said that if the Mexican president helped the CIA to scheme, is that what that says? Scheme? To scheme to overthrow? Hold on. Achieve? The CIA guy suggested that if the Mexican president helped the CIA to achieve the overthrow of Castro, he would not need to deal with the problem of inviting Castro to Mexico. So the president of Mexico is saying, you know, guys, I'm not going to show you that I'm faithful to the United States, I'm not going to invite the Fidel Castro to Mexico. And then the CIA says, you know, you don't have a problem about whether or not you have to invite Fidel Castro to Mexico if you just help us overthrow him. That's the long and short of it. And that's just so telling of how the CIA is operating. And again, isn't it exactly how you thought things were going? You know, we had this whole thing with the Podesta emails in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. And it kind of showed you how you thought the government was operating, but you didn't know. Well, these files, if you just go through them at random, and that's what I did at first, and then I started to go through them categorically, you will see that the CIA operates exactly how you thought they did, but you just didn't know. Somebody wants to work for the government, okay, we have to find out everything about them. Somebody we're suspicious of, we've got a giant file on them, and we're going to ask every single person that they know if they've ever done anything suspicious. Do those guys look like spies? Probably, if they just say they're random tourists in Havana, Cuba. Now, in the spirit of that, in the spirit of those American guys spying in Cuba, and again, I'm not pro-Cuba. Will that come up? Are we still in an era where somebody's going to call you a communist sympathizer if you criticize the CIA? Probably, probably come from CNN. But in the spirit of those guys in Cuba from the United States, this is another file I picked out that shows you the briefing for a person that they're getting ready to spy for the United States, for the CIA in Cuba. So basically, this is what they tell the person to expect and how they prepare them and how they brief them to spy in Cuba for the United States. So this guy's name is Mr. Tichborne. I didn't look into the files about this guy or who he is or anything, but the following is set forth as clarification of your present mission and the procedures which will be followed in the conduct of it. Please indicate your agreement by signing below. So the operation, again, this is a spying operation. This is a briefing of a spy. You will be briefed generally on some aspects of the Cuban situation while in Washington. The major briefing to be given to you concerning the local political situation, security precautions, and more detailed instructions on your present mission will be undertaken upon your arrival in Havana. Upon arrival in Havana, a tourist card will be given to you at the Cuban Immigration Authority. You will give your true name and occupation in the United States and state that you were there as a, quote, tourist. Your initial contact in Havana will be with Iden A., which is some sort of alias. When making this call, you'll identify yourself as Fred Norse, which we can scroll up and see that person's name is Mr. Tichborne. They're going by Fred Norse. Iden A. will give you a briefing mentioned in the paragraph above. Iden A. will arrange for you to be in contact with two individuals for the purpose of starting you on your assignment. It is anticipated that other leads and contacts will result from these introductions, both in Havana and in the interior. When talking to any local contacts while in Cuba, your cover story will be the following: that you are talking to them on behalf of an unnamed American business and investors in order to assess discreetly their position in legal resources as concerns the revolutionary laws and to determine the possibility for future financial development and investments. We'll go to the next page for you. Zoom that in a little bit as well. Next, it says we're providing you with a letter from a cover company, which you will use only in the case of extreme emergency in the event that you come to the attention of the Cuban authorities. This letter states you are there on vacation and that this company has asked you to get some first-hand information on the subjects in paragraph 7 above while there if you are so inclined. This will provide you with a plausible excuse for being there as a tourist and one interested in talking with local personalities. So they're sending a guy to Cuba saying he's working as a tourist, but he's asking around as a businessman, looking for investment opportunities and looking for advice on how the laws, what the laws are going to be under the communist government regarding doing business with American companies. And then they say your mission generally is to talk with so many knowledgeable persons, with as many knowledgeable persons as possible regarding the political situation in Cuba, with special emphasis on the opposition, its strengths, weaknesses, plans, and programs. Of particular interest is the possibility or feasibility of coalescence of these opposition groups. While your present assignment, you will keep with a record of your expenses, which will enable you to submit the required accounting for funds upon requests. In keeping the account, you should note times of arrival, departure, blah, blah, blah. So when I was reading this, I was thinking of Chinese spy operations in Canada and the United States. You will go there as an international student. You will ask around. You will have this cover story, which would be way easier to fix if you're Chinese than if you're an American. If you're from North America, a lot of people's information is easily obtained. If you're in China, you could basically make up anything. You're not going to be able to find that information easily. It's the same thing, but China's more secretive, so it'll be easier to cover for. And this must happen all the time. People must be doing this all the time for the Chinese government. Go there, you're a student, you're a tourist, take pictures. Nobody's going to care in this day and age as compared to the 60s. And tell us what you find. Here's your cover story. You have a letter if you really need one. And that's how it works. That's how it worked here. They just say, go over there, say you're a tourist. Here's your backstory. You're actually just asking for business purposes. Here's a letter. And what you really do is trying to get information on government opposition groups and the weaknesses of the government in that region. So crazy stuff there. This is another funny one, I thought. Some of the stuff I came across. Well, before I get to that, how he said that last letter said all the expenses? There's a lot of documents in there as well that end with, here's how much I'm charging the CIA. One of them was 2 months' salary, which was $500 because it was the 60s, and like $37 for expenses. I thought that was pretty funny, that all this contract work that's going out, and people are billing the CIA for their travel and meeting expenses. This is something really funny that I saw that was from Labeled Secretive Case, one of the John F. Kennedy. A bunch of them say 2025 release under the President John F. Kennedy Assassination Records Act of 1992. So I guess a lot of these things were supposed to be released in 1992, but weren't. This is something that was labeled secret that I thought was really funny. It is a simple request for derogatory info. So secret from Brussels, I think, to the director. Request any available derogatory info for passage to the liaison on a company called Military Armament Corporations, or MAC, from Marietta, Georgia. According to the liaison, MAC recently shipped machine gun and pistol ammo to a local firm named U.S. Army Surplus Guns and Ammunition. So this guy finds out through his liaison that somebody's shipping guns, which said on the second page, which I don't think I included there, but it said on the second page that they shipped guns and ammo that were from a government agency, and this person wants dirt on this company. They're just sending a general request for derogatory info on this company. I thought that was really funny that you just write to your, station manager or whomever across the world and ask for dirt. Now, I've got another file that I need to remember what it's about. I think this is the Brazilian guy. Yes, it is. So this next file that's CIA, return to CIA, background use only, do not reproduce, labeled secret. This is about a man who works at a Brazilian consulate in Miami, discussing with the CIA, or the file discusses how he was offered to buy weapons stolen from a U.S. agency and he declined, which I just thought was very interesting information. Again, most of these files are just about CIA operations and spy operations. Mexico mentioned a lot, Cuba mentioned a lot, and the USSR mentioned a lot. Very few actual files on Lee Harvey Oswalt and his operations, but the ones that I've read, which again are only a couple hundred of 2,000, I have to go through more and update you more. The super serious stuff here for unauthorized opinions, but important stuff because I think in the media, tons of people aren't willing to go through this. When it was a pain in the ass to us to download these files, I'm not seeing many people just actually going through the files because it's a pain in the ass. You have to open everything. People have suggested going through ChatGPT or something, but I'm guessing you still have to convert all the files to readable files. You could probably bulk dump them into Google Images, maybe, because that will recognize text as well. But again, it's 6 gigabytes worth of stuff, and I think you'll miss something if you don't go through them on your own. So a lot of these pages are just random documents, lists of secret agents across the world in like 1962 or whatever, but that's not very interesting information. It's interesting to see, but I managed to pick out a bunch of interesting stories just to show you how CIA operations were back in the day. So like I mentioned, this is operations about a Brazilian consulate in Miami, and it says, once a month, a pouch passes between the Brazilian consulate in Miami and the embassy in Havana. This person, who's named as A.M. Cutler 1 has made use of it to send letters for posting in Havana to A.M. Cutler 2. The two brothers, whose name I can't really read here, are personal friends of A.M. Cutler 1 and 2, but A.M. Cutler 1 does not believe that they, quote, would be willing to carry or send any espionage material, any obvious espionage material to Cuba. He does believe that they would be willing to carry canned goods to A.M. Cutler 2, and this is being explored with the idea of concealing money, maps, etc. in the 10 cases. For the purposes of trying to develop new KU tube operations, A.M. Cutler 1 has been following up leads given by his case officer and has interviewed what appears to be two Mexican guys. So that's very interesting. They have guys who work at a Brazilian embassy in Miami who are willing to smuggle things to Havana, but not any obvious things that would get them caught or things that would obviously be espionage materials if caught, but they are willing to explore smuggling things in cans. And now where this got interesting was in the next page where one of I believe it's the Brazilian consulate guy talks about being offered guns. So-and-so has received word that a guy named Piedemonte is looking for a way to leave Cuba. Cutler 1 is trying to develop additional information on Piedemonte situation. Other press clippings have shown blah, blah, blah. On December 22, 1962, Cutler reported that he'd been invited by Chique Montes from a Cuban citizen to join a maritime expedition aimed against a tanker traffic on the south coast of Cuba. So this is a guy in Havana who works for the United States. He's been invited by a Cuban guy to go on an expedition against a tanker off the coast of Cuba with the further objective of seizing a Cuban frigate with the cooperation of its captain. Details were sent to headquarters in December in the hope that it might be possible to make a tentative identification of the naval officer involved. So this guy's getting offered to seize Cuban ships with this guy not knowing that he works for the U.S. government, right? Or maybe that he does know that he works for the U.S. government. Who knows? Two individuals named Ronaldo Lopez and Enrique Sejas had approached him. This is, again, A.M. Cutler 1 was approached by two guys named Ronaldo Lopez and Enrique Sejas, had approached him with the offer to sell him some weapons allegedly belonging to, and there's a note down at the bottom, a line drawn, weapons belonging to U.S. government agency. So again, the same guy who works at the embassy in Havana for the United States was approached by two guys with the offer to sell him weapons that belong to U.S. agency, which were stored on an unidentified key and valued at several $1,000s. Lopez and Sejas told someone named Diaz that an armed raid on the key would have to be simulated so that suspicion would not fall on them, and that the raid would have to be pulled off in either the night of Christmas or New Year's Eve, when one of the other of the men would be on guard duty at the key. Diaz had turned down the offer. The two men were indeed of interest to Cuba, which I believe is an American asset, and that an underwater demolition team was possibly involved. Appropriate defensive measures were immediately taken. I'm guessing that means they were unalived. So, to summarize, what's happening here is that they were smuggling things from a Brazilian embassy official to Cuba for some period of time. This was reported by the American guy, or the person working for the United States in Cuba, and that person who has been working for the United States in Cuba has been offered multiple times to either pirate or make a pirate assault on a Cuban ship, and he's also been offered to buy weapons stolen from a U.S. government agency, which is on on one of the keys, I guess. on an unidentified key. So they wanted to fake a raid on an installation to sell this person these guns, and in order to make a cover story for why they were selling these, or for why they lost these guns, they were going to fake a raid when somebody was the guard on duty. So basically, we're going to sell you this stuff, and we're going to make it look like a robbery. And all these people on the inside working for these government agencies, and it said their underwater demolition team was possibly involved. That sounds like the Americans were some guys were defecting there or just trying to sell stuff and were involved, and defensive measures were immediately taken. And this is some of the crazy stuff that's happening. We've got a couple more here for you. Don't worry. We've got the juiciest one, I think, here, which actually doesn't have anything to do with JFK. And we start by talking about this person named Hosea Williams. Hosea Williams was a political activist, a civil rights activist in the 60s, I believe. He was an ordained minister, a businessman. This is just a Wikipedia page we're reading here. He was considered to be a member of Martin Luther King Jr.'s inner circle under the banner of their flagship organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, that Martin Luther King is a part of. Now, why am I telling you that? Because this guy is named in these CIA documents, trying to coordinate with communist China to create an uprising, a race-based uprising. So isn't that very interesting? Let me repeat that for you as I zoom in these documents and prepare them. A guy who is part of Martin Luther King's inner circle, after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, wanted to coordinate an international race-based uprising with communist China. Let's read on about that. This is a letter, a secret letter from the CIA to headquarters. And this person's name you see at the top, which is, JEPYX1, JEPYX1 essentially, obviously some sort of clandestine name, entertained Hosea Williams, this guy. Again, Hosea Williams is a personal friend, or at least in the inner circle of Martin Luther King Jr., visited Ethiopia and attended a lecture session at the home of some person's identification number, at which Williams talked to a group of approximately 50 Ethiopians and other nationalities, as reported following interesting facts and observations. So at the lecture at the home of some guy, Williams stated that he knew J.K. Lance had arranged the assassination of Martin Luther King. Now, I tried to look up who J.K. Lance was. J.K. Lance, all one word. J. Clance, two names. All these sort of things. I couldn't find any names that matched that had to do with Martin Luther King or anything around the investigation. So if I missed that, or if that's a group or something, please correct me. But this guy, who is on the inner circle of Martin Luther King Jr., says he knows this J.K. Lance or J. Clance arranged his assassination. He said that he also suspected the same person was involved in the assassination of Malcolm X, but he was not as sure about this as he was about the Martin Luther King assassination. Williams has had no luck in getting a visa from the Chi-Coms, meaning the Chinese Communists, for a Peking visit. Peking being a place/university in China, okay? So he told JPIX, for lack of a better pronunciation, this operative, that he wanted to go to Peking to get the Chi-Com commitment to plan for a unified effort among all colored peoples to fight racial discrimination worldwide. He now senses that he's getting somewhat of a runaround from the Chi-Coms. So this guy is telling people in Africa that where is he? He's in Ethiopia. A visit to Ethiopia, talking to a bunch of Ethiopians, and he says at this house that he knows who killed Martin Luther King Jr. He thinks that it might be the same person who killed Malcolm X, but he's not as sure about him killing Malcolm X as he is about him killing Martin Luther King Jr. And at the same time, he's trying to visit a Chinese university, or at least a place in China, to meet with Chinese communists to help him with a worldwide uprising of colored people, as he quotes it. I would never use that term. We can't be using the term people of color. It's fine. For some reason, it's fine now. So he's trying to get this international uprising to be backed by the Chinese communists. Very interesting, isn't it? Page 2, where it gets even more interesting. Peking was apparently not enthusiastic about his visit, though he still has hopes of being able to go to China from New Delhi, where he proceeded from Ethiopia. So he went from Ethiopia to India, and he's trying to get into China from India now to talk to the communists. In private talks, Williams displayed curiously ambivalent attitude towards Martin Luther King. He clearly harbors resentment because of King's relatively affluent background as compared to his own. So he's jealous of Martin Luther King, and even after he's dead, he doesn't really like him. Williams had some contact with Ethiopian students and intellectuals critical of the regime, as well as with some southern Sudanese, and this opened up his eyes to a problem of individual freedom in Africa. The agent asked him how he looked at the problem of the future of freedom for individuals in Africa as compared to the freedoms of individuals who are black in the United States, the freedoms of individual black Americans, and he admitted that prospects for expansion for individual freedoms. Sorry if this seems broken up while I'm reading it, pausing it there. It's because this is poorly typed. This is me reading somebody's, I'm guessing, typed up document from the 1960s, and they leave out a bunch of in-between words. So let me read that again. The agent asked him how he looked at the possible future of freedoms for individuals in Africa as compared to the freedom of individuals of black Americans, and he admitted that the prospects for expanding individual freedoms in Africa did not seem good, and that both black Americans' present status and prospect appeared superior to conditions in Africa on this score. Overall, the agent evaluated Williams and said, quote, he has a lot to learn, and this trip is opening his eyes and confronting him with facts and ideas he is otherwise completely unaware of. He is likely to profit from it because he's basically intelligent and capable and not just a nut like Jomo Logan, whoever that is. Should we look that up in real time? Jomo Logan. So what's interesting about this is you have a guy who was on the inner circle of Martin Luther King. Sorry about that. Moving the screen there. We have a guy who's on the inner circle of Martin Luther King Jr. who thinks he knows he was killed, even though he doesn't really like him because he grew up richer than he did, trying to communicate with Chinese communists about a global uprising of black people and saying that they're oppressed. But then he goes to Africa and sort of realizes that life is way better for black people in the United States, where they're fighting for civil rights and obviously saying things are too racist and what's going on there is oppressive. But he says he goes to Ethiopia and talks to these Ethiopians and Sudanese people and sees that they're not as individually free. So places run by black people, the black people aren't as free. Meanwhile, in America, they're saying that things are terrible and they're looking for, civil rights or whatever was happening at that exact time before the Civil Rights Act, and saying that people in America actually have it better now than the people in Africa at the time, and they actually have it, looks like they're going to have it better in the future than the people in Africa at the time. Nobody comes up for Jomo Logan. So we're going to leave it there. Thanks for sticking with me through this. I'm going to be putting all of these findings out on my Twitter page at Andrew Says TV, so you can see what I've revealed there. A lot of it's very interesting. A lot of it's weird. A lot of it's nothing. A lot of it's nothing. A lot of it is lists. A lot of it is people making requests for information. A lot of it is expense reports. I've only gone through 100. But a lot of it is about CIA operations, and that's what's interesting. That's why you're sticking with me. Can't have it anymore. The CIA. Too many CIA operatives walking around as tourists. We used to like the CIA pretending to be people. Now we can't have it. Now they suck. Unauthorized opinions. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I wouldn't lie to you except for maybe this once. What am I? The CIA?